There is a history of conspiracy theories going back to the 1980s satanic panic
Yes.
stuff of children being victimized by evil forces.
Mm-hmm.
And that has played out most recently in the QAnon conspiracy theories and a whole host of
And
sub-theories.
If you go back even farther, isn't part of the lore around witches that they eat children? I believe there is some folklore around witches that they would eat children. I mean, what is the Hansel and Gretel story but a witch living in the forest that intends to eat children? So this, and again, of course, there's this element of like, well, yeah, what is more innocent than a child, and what is more evil than victimizing a child? But what I want to talk about in light of this movie is how you see something different in Freddy Krueger, because you see the kind of modern situation that may contribute to an increasing fear around children, potentially. This is speculation. I don't know exactly the levels of fear around children throughout history, but you made the point that as our lives have shifted and both parents work, people spend a lot of time outside the home. There isn't generally how there was in the past, where people had multi-generations living at home, which could spend more time doing childcare. When both parents leave the home to work, ain't nobody at home unless it's a nanny that's not family, or they go to daycare, or they go to school, which many brilliant minds have made the argument that school, as we see it now, the public school and all that, for the most part, at least to some degree, especially for the earlier years of school, is a large part just child care. It's just a system by which your children are being cared for. Of course, they're providing good instruction during that time. But I mean, especially for the earlier years, they're not learning about the Constitution. So a large degree of kindergarten, first grade, and all that, a lot of it is child care with, instruction and socialization put in. But again, why would you need that socialization? Historically, the child would be around siblings and at home with many other parental figures and guardians. So you see this in the movie. You see the divorced parents, you see the distant parents, and you see the school that is where harm takes place at one point. Freddy Krueger does come to get Nancy at school. So school isn't even a safe place, although it helps her to stay awake. That's one of the things, is that when they're at school, they're awake, and Freddy Krueger can come when they're asleep, but she falls asleep in the classroom. So we have this kind of dysfunctional, disintegrating family structure that leaves the children at the mercy of a predator. And go on with your point. You can expand on that idea a little bit about how that may contribute to this growing insecurity about who's got our kids. And we keep seeing that play out in culture throughout time, whether it's QAnon, whether it's a satanic panic, whether it's the school board and education discussions. All of that ties into that root fear about who has your kid.
Well, as we were discussing this a little bit last night in preparation for the episode, it's also about, it's not just about who has your kids, it's about why do they have your kids. Well, my generation, there's this phrase called latchkey kids. They had to make up a phrase for it because it was fairly new. The idea that divorce rates became higher, when I was a kid. Two parents often had to be in the workforce. These are all trends that were beginning, and playing out in the 70s, 80s. I mean, I'm not that old, but, in this general time frame and have continued on. So there are these these issues that come up now, which, see, I don't think would have even they wouldn't have needed to be dealt with, because first off, we also have to remember, historically, I'm talking about historically, your kids would have been working like in a field or whatever instead of in any type of school. Schooling, public schooling, I'm not trying to make some case that I think that it's bad or anything. It's actually a really great benefit, when it was started in the 1800s, and to educate people, to make people literate, to increase standards in all sorts of ways. On the other hand, you have to look at it as going hand in hand with this kind of, it's not that it's the cause of it. It's just that family structures are dissolving and have continued to. Some of you may say, great, that's a great idea. We don't like the nuclear family or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not talking about the morality, this or that of it. I don't care about that. I'm talking about the fact. There are more people without both a father and a mother in the house. There are people who have a father and mother, but they both have to work. There's less, there's less, I would argue that there's less connection. And so then you have to put your kid, I don't have kids, but I assume this is how it works. You have to entrust someone else with your kid. And in this case, it's the school and the state. Whenever that happens, I have this feeling that there's fear and maybe guilt and maybe a whole mixture of emotions between the parent and then the institution. And so now you have a lot of argument about who has the right to teach your kids what in public schools. And in the 80s, you had part of this satanic panic movement, which was the idea, a lot of it was related to childcare. So like kids that were in childcare, the accusations were that they were being abused in childcare. So again, look, you see this thing where the parents are having to take their kids, put them over into some sort of institution. Now, as far as I know, the vast majority, I mean, I'm sure there were cases of actual, misdeeds on the part of people throughout history or whatever. But my understanding is, in general, this was a big panic and like people imagining things. This gets fairly complicated because it goes into where they would interview the kids, and the kids were very. You can lead, when you're questioning someone, you can lead, especially children, into telling you whatever the story you want them to tell you by asking questions a certain way. Not even on purpose, but that's just how it happens. Because kids pick up on what the adults want to hear. And if they already know that, then they'll kind of tend to go along with those stories. But the broader point is that there is a problem. And the problem is, you have this tension between parents and institutions of all kinds. And then you seem to occasionally get this, I don't think it's just fear. I think there may be elements of guilt to it, that they don't have the time maybe they would like to spend with their children. And so they I don't know that it's natural to take like your 3 or 4 year old kid and put them in the trust of strangers, like back
like
in
7
prehistoric
hours too.
for a majority of the day.
Yeah.
So like, look, I know cultures and times are all different, but in a general way, if you lived in a small village or whatever, you may be entrusting your children to the care of other people, but it may be neighbors or extended family. Think about the American system again. We don't even have oftentimes that the thing that like you from having kind of roots in Cuba or whatever have more of an extended family,
Exactly.
where you could maybe put your child.
Different. So let me tell you a little bit about that. That is actually considered a little bit offensive in my culture. On the Hispanic side, my grandma was aghast at the idea of my mom putting me in daycare or anything like that. And I actually have a story of, I guess it wasn't abuse, but of not getting the kind of care that you would get from a family member. I think it was one of the daycares that when you're too young to learn anything, so it's like preschool kind of thing. And my mom said that she had this bad feeling and she just couldn't shake it, so she went to the school and just showed up, and she found me like crying in the playground, like just sitting there like totally red-faced, being ignored by the teacher or whatever, the caretaker. And so I mean, there's a lot of kids there. So, it's not that, oh, the person was evil per se, but here's something that I've always noticed, and it's the same for the care of anything. If it's not yours, you don't care for it at the same level. And that goes for dogs, that goes for kids, that goes for elderly, for your elderly family members. That's the same situation in nursing homes where you have people that are vulnerable and dependent and need care, but they're getting care from strangers. And there is also an issue with, I don't know how widespread it is, but there's definitely a concern that people have to deal with neglect or even abuse of elderly people in the care of those facilities. And it's the same thing for anything that is yours that you place in the care of someone that's not related or connected to you. There's just less ownership. You could maybe even extend that logic to property, right? There's that that famous issue of, if it's not yours, you don't take care of it the same way for renting. And if it's your house, you usually put a lot of care into it. If you're renting it, it's transient. You don't take full ownership of it. You don't tend to take care of it just as well. And so it's a weird thing because, again, yeah, it's not a moral argument saying like women should be in the house taking care of kids, like, but we do have to contend with what it means when you have such a distinct shift in the patterns of child rearing, but just general family structures. So it goes both ways. It's like that same thing of that, while we don't have the extended family living with us to take care of our kids, we also don't often take care of our extended family now either. So I mean, that but it is a cultural difference. There's a little bit of a cultural difference there. And because my grandma would always be the one to take care of me. And that's, I think after that incident too, my mom was just like, no, you'll take care of her until she has to start school. And so I'm not entirely sure what to attribute that difference to, because I imagine part of it is that in certain parts of Latin America, there's still a lot more of the traditional family structure where women stay home. So, and grandparents live at home. So that kind of family structure is still somewhat, well, it is still more popular in Latin America than United States for sure. And so that's something we have to contend with.